Daily Wire produced like the two movies. What was it?
Yeah.
Run, Hide, Kill,
Fight.
or Fight.
Yeah.
And then The Shut In. And I was looking at these and I was just like, these look terrible. These look utterly terrible. And it's like when I watched like Christian films years ago, there's no progress being made in that regard. Progress in the sense of like, you got to go forwards to go back to like Christian art and what it once was. And the thing is, everyone's like, okay, we just got to change the words. We got to change what they're saying. Meanwhile, the entire form, the style, the visuals, everything else literally just stays the same, and in most cases is just mediocre or worse.
Yeah, it's a pale imitation of the crap that already exists.
But there's nobody and this is like, I'm gonna freaking go off right now. I like watching a lot of like conservative people for, I don't know, they have a very good way of like editorializing news and like presenting facts and whatnot. But my gosh, are they illiterate when it comes to art and everything? In fact, at worst, dismissive. It's almost like it's of no use to them. Yeah. And they pay lip service like, oh, we got to take back the culture. We got to do this. It's like, well, you're not doing anything about that, by being an ignoramus. And this is the thing too, though. There is a huge gap, a huge need for people with more knowledge who can provide better examples.
Conservatives, on the main, don't understand the purpose of art. I think that's you're right. Like they're saying like we got to take back the culture, but they don't even know what culture is.
And then they say like, oh, did you see the new Dune? Like that Hans Zimmer music was epic. And I want to flip the computer over. I'm just And it's like I'm on the other side of the bars. I'm watching. I'm just like, yes, everything else you were saying I agree with, but now it's like you just suddenly started like screaming like a chimpanzee.
Yeah, you know, or it's like the exact opposite, where they're like, did you see the new Dune? It sucked. And then they quibble with some minor political like issue and how it was handled,
or just like nitpicking something like every other freaking 2-bit reviewer on YouTube.
Right. You were kind of saying that earlier too, where it's basically a means to an end. We want to take back the culture means we want to use art to promote these political ideals or these things. And like, you know, maybe they're good ideals and maybe they're things that are worth promoting in some way, but it comes from like such a wrong-headed perspective of what art is. It's not just a vehicle for these things. I remember seeing a while back, there was a conversation between Ben Shapiro and Andrew Klavan, both commentators on the Daily Wire, but it just shows the rift. I think Andrew Klavan's actually a very erudite and concise commentator.
Yeah,
he understands art, and I don't agree with a lot of his takes because he's a grumpy old guy who's a crime writer, and I just don't have the same interest that he does, but he understands the transcendent value of art and what it is. Ben Shapiro is Ben Shapiro. And so Ben Shapiro asks Andrew Klavan, since Andrew Klavan's written a bunch of crime novels and thrillers and things, about novel writing, because Ben Shapiro has actually written a novel. And it was like some like Middle East thriller, and it looked really dire and generic. And Ben Shapiro was basically admitting, you know, I didn't really know what I was doing writing this book, because I thought like, well, am I here to tell a story, or am I here, you know, for my characters to, I don't know, start pontificating? I don't remember exactly what he said, but is my story a vehicle for some message? Are my characters, you know, mouthpieces for my ideas, or am I writing the story? Like, it seemed like he didn't understand the concept of like what a story is and like why he's even writing the novel. He kind of just wants to use the format because he knows it's popular and people read these things to get across some ideas. And he's basically asking Andrew Klavan, like, what is book? Like, what, you know, like, and Andrew Klavan responds, he gives the correct response, where he says, if you're gonna do art, you have to kind of not leave your worldview behind, but trust you to see the world the way you see it. Where it's like, okay, here am I with my beliefs. This is what I think the world is. I'm going to make something beautiful that reflects the world as it is. I don't need to be so afraid that what I believe isn't true, or I don't need to be so afraid that what I believe, you know, I'm not going to express it right. You just have to like make art that is good and true and beautiful. And like from that, you know, you can't help but have your beliefs spring up, but not in like a didactic way, not in a,
Yeah.
the characters grind to a halt and debate this political issue, where somebody gives a speech or a sermon.
And that's the problem, like conservative minded people have fallen into in that regard, is thinking that, and I feel like it's like this, it's something that's come from the left. Like they've bought this idea that, you know, a story, you know, has to have some kind of like polemics in there. It has to be like preach. It has to have, yeah, it has to be like you said, didactic. It's almost like you're making like the personal political, and then these conservatives just buying into that, using that instead of actually doing art with any staying power.
Yeah, I don't know if it's even that they've bought into something from the left, because I think a lot of like people in Hollywood are obviously like they're coming from the left, but a lot of them get this idea. Like instinctively they understand. And I think maybe also they're like too selfish to devote themselves that strongly to an ideal. They want to tell their own stories and talk about the world as they see it. And so I think you do get at least stories that are coming from an honest place, even if they're not all good. At least it's art for art's sake, and maybe layered on top of that, we'll throw in a speech, or we'll have a like an evil conservative. But I think that says more about how two-dimensional their worldview is, as opposed to how much they don't understand art. Because I think Hollywood's always been mainly a liberal enterprise, but I think now is when you're starting to see like didacticism from both sides really take over, and like the left becoming more evangelistic in their views. But it's partially that just conservatives are just too rationalistic. A lot of them are in some ways too secular. They have their ideals, they have their ideas, but from the conservative side you tend to see people who can be brilliant analytical minds, and you see a lot of people who are enterprising, like entrepreneurs, people who can be really successful in business or in industry and these areas. But the arts, you know, they kind of undervalue it. Maybe it's sort of baked into what American conservatism has always been and how it's manifested itself in the culture, where there's always that tendency to undervalue art, or just see it as a vehicle where, okay, here's this art, but now we will take a break and someone will explain to you in a bulleted list, you know, this set of political ideals.
It feels like that's what you fall back on when you have nothing else to bring to the table. Like case in point with these movies that had a brief period of hoopla to them. And it's just like, if not for that, why should anybody care? Because these are like, you know, worse than Hollywood movies. There's zero vision. There's zero attempt to show that there was any real purpose, like why these movies should even exist, other than like the ideological reasons that have been attached to them, whatever they are. And
they're attachments. And I think in some ways they give credence to the narrative that conservatives can't make art, because like art is so much more than a message. It's the whole package. It's, in terms of a movie, it's the look of the film, the cinematography, the production design, the editing, you know, the script, and all these different elements. Each one of those things expresses a worldview, just not in a straightforward way. And so if you're making a grungy, shaky cam, you know, desaturated thriller, that says something about your worldview, or at least, you know, it implies something. It doesn't necessarily shout it, and it can mean different things in different contexts, but that's how art works. That's how it functions. And that's a lot
or
of
it also just says that you only watch things from the past 20 years.
Yeah, it's true. But even that stuff from the past 20 years, there's a philosophy behind why they did those things. And, you know, maybe it's being cynical, maybe it's being materialistic, saying like, well, it's realistic because it looks like a documentary, or, you know, it's desaturated because
that's
there's no color
important thing.
And these things are fluid. Like you can use handheld for other reasons. It's not, again, if you're a conservative and you're listening to this, you're probably thinking, oh, this equals this. No, it's a complicated network of things that isn't entirely, you know, that isn't entirely explained. It's not a math equation. It's something subtler and stranger, and yes, more spiritual than that. And you know, it's something that requires an understanding of some of these transcendent ideas, and it has its own language, and it's not as rationalistic and as cut and dry as all that. But yeah, it's basically, when you look at Run, Hide, Fight, when you look at Shut In, the style and the way that they're made shows that you're just aping liberal Hollywood. So everything about the movie screams Hollywood, but not as good. And so it's, but you're embracing the worldview through the aesthetics, whether you realize it or not. that's what you're doing.
Yeah, and
And
at
it
that
doesn't
point,
matter.
you're just doing it by rote.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter if if Thomas Jane comes out for 2 minutes and gives some kind of conservative speech, because the movie is 98% inspired by what Hollywood has already done, and we know what that worldview is.
Yeah, we're gonna make these cinematography choices, directing choices, because that's what people take seriously now. That's what we have.
Yeah.
That's the grammar of movies today. And yeah, the same thing with biblical films. And there's so many other ways you can do biblical films. It doesn't all have to be okay. Passion of the Christ is a really good film, and that film like went all over the place with the visuals. Like it wasn't bogged down all that. Like it was very graphic and very gritty, but it also took these other routes with the visuals that were above the mundane.
It really is a work of art. It's very deliberate.
One thing I just remembered, there was a situation on Twitter before I left Twitter where I saw various conservatives jumping on the melon-headed guy with the music channel, Anthony Fantano.
That needle drop, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he was just like going off on this rant about how the right has never produced any good art, which is obviously idiotic statement. And then people were throwing all these examples out there, kind of the most obvious ones, like, oh, Beethoven, oh, whatever, like people
Bach,
who
Tolkien,
Tolkien, yeah. But what they missed, and nobody, like not even people who I think are really savvy to these things, like Lawrence Southern, it was Anthony Fantano said something like, the right is not about progress. Like they produce art that is challenging and radical and different. And it's like, okay, I'm going back to like Elon Musk talking about going into space. Okay, progress. Yeah. What is that? What are we doing with that? Like
progress to where?
To where? Yeah. It just because it's radical, just because it breaks, it's subversive, it's transgressive. Oh, therefore it's good. Like how, like what a freaking mindless statement like that is right now.
Yeah.
But the thing is, the conservatives like rebutting him, they just like went right over their heads. They didn't even notice. They could have rebutted with, the right like holds up truth and beauty in art. And has stories that uplift the human soul and find ways to create that. Like that's what can really add to art, and not just like this endless just pursuit of novelty.
Yeah, because what happens if you just endlessly pursue progress, whatever that means, is that you spin off into chaos and just non-meaning very, very quickly. And again, we're talking about modern, mostly American conservatives who don't get this, because throughout time, yeah, there have been a ton of great conservative artists, and in a lot of ways, I mean, a lot of the art that's been passed down to us is only there because of conservatives, but also a lot of great art comes out of being commissioned by kingdoms to sort of represent a lineage, represent the history and the texture of culture. We get so much art from that. I mean, all the great cathedrals and churches throughout time, and you're totally right. Progress is happening whether you want it to or not, but it's, can you save and carry forward these things that past generations have left to us and bring them into the world that we're being dragged kicking and screaming, whether we like it or not, as human beings into. And in this new light, like, how do we save these things? How can we use these things? And like, maybe that's the way forward. If if Daily Wire wants to make a decent conservative movie, maybe look back at Hollywood in the 40s, like what were they doing, or older filmmakers, like what cinematic techniques were they using? And I'm not saying make The Artist. Like, I'm not saying just do an homage.
Almost just say, like, go back to basic. Like, that's what I'm thinking. Just why do people, what is the purpose of making a movie? Like, what is
a shot?
What is a shot? There you go.
What is film music? What is its purpose?
Start with the Great Train Robbery.
You really have to at this point, because otherwise you're just gonna make inferior copies of other things. Yeah, like, go back in time, look at film history, see what worked, and don't just copy it. Like, don't just by rote do it, because then you're just doing the same thing that you're doing but with older movies, and then you look like even more of a fool. Take those things, study those things, what works, what doesn't, how can we apply these things today, and experiment. There is conservative experimentation. It's you can take things that have come before, you can see, like, how does this fit into this new era, into this new realm that we're in now in our present situation, using the things that have come before, but also integrating new things that have come along over time. There's life there, because there's structure and there's novelty, both together, and you're plugged into the transcendent, which again is something that is being drained out of art today because people don't believe in it, or they reject it, or they can't think of anything more transcendent than themselves or a computer, apparently.
Yeah, and I think a lot of a lot of like conservatives, they understand, or they can sort of grasp that art is important because they've been affected by art, obviously,
right,
but they don't know hardly, like, they don't know what they're talking about. And there's a real need, there's room for people who know their stuff and who can contribute to that.
I don't even know, like it's literally like, how do you build this thing from the ground up? I mean, maybe, like, here's the other side of the equation too, is I don't actually know. I think the ones that are coming out now are different, but like with Run, Hide, Fight, I don't even know if Daily Wire, if that was an in-house movie that was made, or if they're just distributing it. Because like, also there's the other side too, where if you're a fledgling production company, it's like, do you do crappy Poverty Row movies to kind of make your name in the industry? Like, I don't know how much that's at play, like if these were just movies that they purchased for distribution, or if they, it's not like Ben Shapiro is in the back like writing scripts. It's, these are other people who are on the creative side behind these films. But moving forward, like, even if that is the case, which I think is the best case scenario, that they're just kind of cynically trying to get their foot in the door, they're still marketing these movies under the guise of, we are conservative voices, we need to take back the culture and get in this space. And then everybody's going, yes, we will support you in doing this thing. And there's all this fervor for these movies that are coming out.
Yeah, and they that will have no staying power, and as just fail as works of art. So and you think, okay, the same people who would want to go see a movie like that, maybe they can think of a movie, of course, that like they love, that has a lot of values that they want to see in movies. I mean, I'm sure like people are like, oh, John Wayne, he was go, or that Clint Eastwood, or even going back, like man, the Ten Commandments, or Ben-Hur, stuff like that. And it's like, yes, movies like that could be made again if we just had people who are a little more literate with the medium and art in general.
Yeah, and it's like, you take a conservative in a room and you're like, okay, I know you like John Wayne, let's watch Stagecoach together. Okay, you hit play on the Blu-ray player. Okay, what have we learned? What can we take from this? It's like, you want me to make this movie again? No, stop. This is not what I'm saying. You want me to shoot something in black and white? No, you don't have to. That's not what I mean. It's like, what can you actually draw out of this? I feel like you have to. It's so outside of the conservative purview now. It didn't used to be. Now that you really do. I mean, you were joking earlier when you said start with a great train robbery, but honestly, like, maybe. Like,
I wasn't really joking.
Yeah.
Like, for me personally, I've been rereading just film history, and I'm just thinking like, okay, when they discovered motion pictures, you point at something, you film it, you show it, and just the act of like showing it, and then it's like learning to walk again. It's like, you add cuts, you add angles, you have to really think about, there's the grammar, like they, you hear the term grammar of film. There's that grammar. You have to understand what words mean. And I'm guilty of this sometimes, but so much today, people just get so mealy-mouthed, or they use words inappropriately in the sense that they don't understand the meanings. But they just hear, it's almost like a whisper down the lane thing, where it's just certain phrases, that's what filmmaking's become like now. And you have to go back and understand what is the etymology or the cinemology of this kind of shot, or of this, what, like, so that you're actually doing it for a reason. But you got the great train robbery. It's it's where you have to start.
I mean, honestly, like, not holding myself up as any kind of example, but I mean, that's what I had to do in my own life. Like, when I'm making movies on VHS with my friends as a kid, it's a wide shot and we move through the scene. And then eventually I figure out, I could put the camera here. Maybe I could put the camera close to this person's face. And then I can come out again for the wide shot. And so I'm understanding, like, okay, camera placement, editing. And as I'm getting older, I recognize, like, okay, you can use editing for these different purposes. And if you build up from that point, you can learn, like you're saying, the purpose of the various cinematic tools at your disposal. Yeah, I don't even know what that would look like. Is it a boot camp? Is it?
Who knows what it could look like, but
Mhm.
it's definitely like definitely needs to be called out more, because it's not good enough what is being done.
And it's like not even a good start is the thing. Like if it was a good, I understand humble beginnings, but if you've
Mhm.
already lost because you're basically admitting that you can't do anything new. You're just aping like the lowest common denominator of what already exists. And
Mm.
that says more about worldview than you could possibly realize. And that shows just how little literacy you have with the medium that you're working in.
But I don't know. But that's been on my chest for a long time.
Mm-hmm. It's a real problem for sure. And it's like it's frustrating because the solution, it's not that difficult. I mean, it is from like an implementation perspective, but
Mhm.
it's really clear what's going on. And it just seems like nobody's seeing it for some reason.